Hello, friends, and welcome to Binge O'Clock, a podcast where we watch something and then we talk about it. I'm Joy Selden, and I've seen almost everything.
I'm Danielle and I've seen almost nothing.
And here we are again with our movie night, and tonight I have made Danielle watch The Crow.
I do love that I did actually just finish watching the movie no less than an hour ago.
I'm factually accurate today. There it is. But yeah, so The Crow was made in 1994, directed by Alex Proyas. The writing credits go to James O'Barr, who actually created the character comic book series and comic strip. The screenplay is written by David Shaw and John Shirley, and it stars Brendan Lee, Rochelle Davis, sort of the little girl who plays Sarah, and Ernie Hudson, who plays police officer Albrecht.
I mean, Sarah gets basically as many lines as everyone else does, because this movie is very little talking.
Very little talking. Danielle was like, in the first, why don't you say, like, in the first 10 seconds of watching this show, you sent me a text message.
I did. You know what? I'm 10 seconds into this movie, and I love that I have pinpointed this as your movie vibe.
She clocked it. She clocked it right away.
It was dark and dreamy, and we kind of swooped in on the scene from the upper left hand, crow-like, as it were. It was perfect.
There may or may not have been fires in the corner.
Or everywhere. Because it's
everywhere.
Devil's Night. Let me get it out of the way. Devil's Night with no apostrophe. Irritating.
And I think that made you biased for part of this film. I think you were already put off by the lack of apostrophe.
See, I think it's dual, because you know me, and you knew to warn me about the fridged woman, which also happens very early in the movie. I think within the first 3 minutes at most.
I mean, and look, and for those of you who haven't seen the film, it's violent by the day's standards and when it came out. Mm-hmm. I would argue that it still has a lot of violence within it. There's a lot of talk of violently killing people and rape.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
think it's a very violent movie.
All of that to say, though, that in the first 3 minutes of the movie, not only do we get a fridged woman, we also get a missed apostrophe. So to your point.
So it's a combination.
It's a combination
of the grammar you wish happened and the fact that where my lady's at.
Right?
It is. It's a pretty big sausage fest in this film. The two women in it, one of them is dead and the other one is an addict.
Don't forget the mystical Asian and the tiny.
Okay, yes. The mystical Asian. I did. Four women total. Yeah, no, it's not extremely diverse in that respect. I do think it has a more diverse cast in having more. I mean, I think we got at least 3 black men and our one Asian woman.
Well, I guess we could do a little bit of plot summary up front, because it won't take too long.
Oh, sure. It's not going to take long. I mean, one of the other things I told Danielle is like, look, this movie is not heavy on the plot. It's pretty heavy on the action. There's not a lot of talking, not a lot of plot to go through. Basically, the movie, for the majority of it, takes place 1 year after there was a murder of a couple in an apartment complex who were basically fighting for renters' rights. Mm-hmm. And a gang of 4 men were sent to sort of scare the woman, but the boyfriend showed up and disrupted all that. And so they decided to kill both of them.
Right.
Cool.
The situation escalated, I guess.
That escalated quickly, and all of a sudden there were 2 dead bodies. Ugh. Well, actually, he was dead, and she ended up 30 hours in surgery, which, oh boy. Not only did you fridge this woman, you had her incapacitated before you fridged her.
Yes.
For 30 hours.
30 hours of trauma.
And 1 year later, things have not really improved, except the boyfriend essentially comes back from the dead with the help of a crow spirit. And dispatches everyone who killed them in pretty gnarly fashion.
Oh, yeah. And so most of the movie is spent with him just basically ping-ponging from person to person, because he remembers the faces of the men who killed him and his fiancée. but doesn't actually know where to find them. So he just takes them down one by one, gathering little pieces of information until he eventually gets to the big bad, who, by the way, I actually finished this entire movie without ever knowing the name of the big bad. So in my notes, every time he does something, it just says big bad.
I mean, so this is sort of a product of its time, right? In the 90s, we weren't really making dark, edgy comic book movies. I mean, you can kind of count Batman, but not really. Batman, I think, skewed a little more cartoony than this did. I mean, I say that with like the city looking how it looked, you know, that beautiful CGI of 1994. But you didn't have these sort of edgy, darker classics. And this movie has become like a cult classic, and it's, you know, in the time since. But it's considered a superhero movie, and with good reason. I mean, first of all, it was a comic book, but second of all, he has superpowers. Like, you know, he is basically bulletproof as long as his crow is fine.
Well, I don't even necessarily read it as bulletproof. He basically has Wolverine powers, right? He has super healing powers. Yeah. So that's super cool. He has
super healing powers. He's sort of got this like telekinetic power that's kind of like not really fleshed out, which I was telling Danielle before we actually hopped on to record that I am actually into that. Like, I love a power that is not really explained. Like, it's just kind of there.
Oh, his psychic power is telepathic.
Yes. His telepathic powers, like his ability, which seem to center around empathy, which make perfect sense for this character, where he can basically pull the experiences from people around him and transfer them to other people, which I think is super neat.
Oh, I agree. I think the only way it's really undefined in the movie is whether he has to be touching someone in order to do that, because sometimes for the uppercase D drama of the moment, he will full on like hold their head in his hands and you'll see the memories transfer. And then there are other little moments like what you had mentioned to me before we started recording the podcast, Joy, where he seems to recognize Sergeant Albrecht before or without ever having met him in person. So where did he get that sense memory from?
Right? Like, that's just fascinating to me, where I'm just like, I don't know. But yes, movies like this weren't really being made even in the 90s. Like, eventually you kind of got the X-Men, which again, not nearly as edgy as this.
Certainly not. Nowhere close.
Exactly. So it was kind of a big gamble to do a movie like this. And it was pretty groundbreaking at the time that it came out because no one was making movies like this. I forgot my original point. It's fine.
I think that was the original point, that this is an edgy movie. And if I was going to fault this movie for doing anything, it is for trying so hard to make it edgy. And sometimes I loved it. Sometimes it was the Crow up on the roof, rocking it out and smashing his guitar. I'm fine with that. I get it. It was an emotional moment. And sometimes, I also am very here for example, one of his more brutal moments where he literally duct tapes a person to their car, puts a grenade into their lap, and then sends them careening off a dock so that when the person's body is eventually found, their body is literally fused to the car and cannot be separated from it, which is excellent because this person was the driver and his name was T-Bird. Love the dramatic irony. All great.
So good.
Don't love moments where, for example, for no reason, the baddies are sitting around taking shots and swallowing bullets. Perhaps the swallowing bullets was just a half step too far for me. I was like, no, this is not what people do.
I don't even know what that's supposed to accomplish, other than to show you that these people are, you know, too big for their britches.
That's exactly what it was supposed to. That's the entire purpose of that scene was to help me, the audience member, understand that they are, I don't know, super bad and super evil and definitely people that we want to see die, I guess.
Yeah. I guess.
But they
I
kind
mean,
of accomplished that by showing them brutally raping and murdering a woman at the beginning of the movie. You know, feel like they accomplished that.
I feel like you already did it. No, yeah. The thing that gets me is even though you have these four guys who are basically interchangeable, right?
Mm-hmm.
They do have their own little personalities. And I feel like scenes like that were sort of there to not endear you to these people, but to literally show you who they were as characters, because we don't get a whole lot of character development throughout this. It's mostly just a revenge story. Eric Draven is there. He knows what he has to do. He doesn't necessarily know where these people are, but like he's on his way to figuring it out. So, you know, you have T-Bird, who is the philosophical one and the driver and who basically runs them all. I also love that he's a philosophical, horrible person who is the leader of the gang. And like in his very own way, like a Batman villain, you know, like.
No, you're right. Absolutely.
Like he has these weird, I don't know, these existential questions. And I'm just like, you just trashed a store, which is like the most base teenage thing you could possibly do.
You trashed an arcade and then set a bomb inside of it. These are just anarchists.
But talk about philosophy some more.
I guess.
Just quote some Nietzsche.
Okay,
No,
and then
100%
there's Skank, who I guess is the tweaker. Is that how we would characterize this character?
I feel like so Skank to me is always like that follower who maybe like fell in with the wrong crowd, because like he does a lot of things where he like repeats things people have said, which isn't to say that Skank himself isn't a terrible, awful person and I'm glad he's dead.
Yes.
But like he definitely was the sort of thing where it's like, well, I followed these people to be cool and to like maybe make some extra money and have a lot of fun, right? Because he repeats the things that T-Bird says a lot, and he's sort of very obviously he's definitely the lowest in the hierarchy. He's the last person to, you know, and that actually is the only reason that I like the swallowing the bullet scene, because you get to see how much crap they give him. Because it's like, no, you drink last. You drink last.
Yeah, you drink last. And T-Bird, who's at the top of their little hierarchy, is the one who takes it one step further. He doesn't just swallow bullets. He also takes cigars and puts them out on his tongue.
Like a weirdo.
Whatever.
I don't know. That's somebody's something.
What I do like actually much better is the scene right after that one, where I think it's right when Eric / the Crow is awakening and coming into himself. And this is after we already have seen all of that brutal imagery from the beginning of the film, but then we see some happier moments between him and Shelley, where he's flashing back on these happier moments. And then there's that fantastic getting ready for revenge montage.
I know, it's so good.
It's so good. I think I just love a good montage.
I mean, if it works, if it quacks like a duck.
Him and Shelley, what an interesting relationship those two had. I do wish I had gotten to see a little bit more of it.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those like, well, these two people got each other.
Yes.
But there wasn't enough time to tell us exactly how they got each other.
Right, yes. He had his rock career and she was supportive, and they were going to get married on Halloween, so they definitely had their goth sides in common, ?
Sure. Yeah. 90s goth is always a weird animal to me, because I'm like, somewhere along grunge, goth took a U-turn.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm always just like, because Sarah is very, very specifically dressed in like grunge skater, while also somehow giving off goth vibes. Like, it's very confusing to me.
Yeah. Oh, I loved Sarah's undercut. I know that was a little bit of an off-topic comment, but loved Sarah's undercut.
No, Sarah with her undercut. Sarah's undercut spurned a bunch of undercuts among, like, I didn't personally do it, but I had a bunch of teenage girl friends who were just like, oh, that's a haircut I could get? And they literally ran out and got it.
That's fantastic. I love that.
Right?
Her plaid shirt, the t-shirt under has a star. She also has a star necklace. It's one of 6 necklaces she's wearing, one of which is actually just a key because she's a latchkey kid. We should talk about Darla, her mother.
I know. Let's talk about Darla. So Darla for me was one of the first, I think, female drug addicts I'd really seen in film.
Oh, interesting.
You know, there was a lot of like male drug addicts, I think, leading up to that. Like I had also seen a bunch of stuff I probably shouldn't have been seeing as a teenager. But like I had also seen Trainspotting, which I think even came out a few years after that. But like usually it was dudes tweaked a little too hard. And like maybe you didn't even see them use, right? Like that there was obviously something slightly checked out about them. The thing with Darla was like that was the first time I'd really seen someone actually like shooting up and actually doing the act of that, and then having somebody trying to instill in her this thing of like, you have a child at home, you have responsibilities, and you need to go take care of that.
Which I'm so glad the movie did. I would have been well and truly upset if she had just died in the bathroom with Fun Boy. Because that's not what her character deserved. It's not. She deserved a second chance, and she got it. The minute where the scene where he literally, you see he calls it morphine, but I thought it was heroin.
He calls it morphine. I'm pretty sure it's heroin.
Anyway, whatever it is. Drugs. You see the drugs literally eking out of her arm.
I know. And they just, like, they weep. And like these 2 track marks just, like, weep these drugs out of her arm. And then, but I also love that, like, she doesn't make any promises to Sarah. She doesn't make any, like, she's just making eggs.
And she's not perfect either, because in that moment, Sarah has to meet her more than halfway to make sure that she keeps it together, you know? Because Darla's up, she's making eggs for breakfast. She cracked those eggs one-handed, let me just point out. So clearly
I know. Clearly she has some skill.
She has some skill. Once upon a time, this woman was cooking and baking and whatever she was doing. I don't know. At any rate, she does get upset because Sarah, at first, is just unwilling to forgive and forget in the moment, which is understandable. How could you all of a sudden
Completely valid response.
Exactly. You can't just on a dime treat someone as a completely different human being. So then Darla, in turn, kind of snaps and goes to throw the eggs away, quitting halfway through that task. That was a great moment, I think. I agree with you.
Yeah.
That it wasn't instant, and it's not like, oh, the drugs aren't in your blood anymore and now everything's fine, because no, obviously not. There's still work to do.
Yeah. And the acknowledgement that, like, addicts don't turn a corner instantly and then are suddenly fine. It instilled in her this, like, sense of responsibility, but then it's up to her to figure out what to do with that. And it's up to her and Sarah to figure out a way to work that out. And, like, yeah, Sarah does, you know, again, meet her more than halfway with, like, no, don't throw them out. I see you're trying. Hang on.
Over easy. Yeah, no, I think Sarah was absolutely the bigger character in that moment. But Sarah's a kid who basically had to grow up on her own. So it tracks. She's a very independent
And that's what I love Sarah so much.
Sarah's fantastic.
Oh, man. Sarah's one, I think, like, this is also, like, you can sort of love or hate the movie for sure. Like, you can think the movie needs work because it does, for sure. I think where it lives is Sarah and her relationship to the other characters she meets and comes into contact with, which is unfortunate because we don't get a whole lot of Sarah. We just kind of get a lot of, like, Sarah sort of traveling around and being in a lot of different places at once and having all these different experiences. But I think that's where it lived when a bunch of teenage girls went to see this movie and they saw themselves in Sarah. And, like, you know, Sarah's such a cute kid, but she's also not, like, you know, it's not like we're looking at a 25-year-old model playing a small child. You know what I mean? Like, she's a very genuine...
She actually is a small child.
Yes.
A small child.
She's actually a small child.
With an undercut, and goes to the bar on her own and gets a free root beer from the bartender.
I think that bartender is the real MVP.
Either that or Albrecht. I'm going to take, the sergeant was a very solid dude. We can't talk about the sergeant yet because I want you to be able to finish talking about Sarah.
No, I mean, I think a lot of teenage girls, when they came to see this movie, really saw themselves in Sarah. And I think it was because Sarah wasn't played for a joke or played for comedy or played for laughs or played too much as a victim because, yes, she is like, you know, she is the one that needs saving at the end of the movie. But we also, like, let's not forget she's a literal child.
She's a literal child. And she built this life that she has for herself, because the two people who were taking care of her, Eric and Shelley, were brutally murdered. Her mother is a drug addict and isn't able to care for her. And so she had to create those connections. She had to decide to go and make a connection with Albrecht and continue seeing him at the hot dog place. She's the one who goes to the bar and becomes friends with the bartender. She gets her, she just figured her stuff out.
I know. She just takes care of business.
Yeah.
And like, yes, she had to grow up too soon and you know, as most children of trauma do. I just think she's so solidly, like, she's both a child and also someone who, as you said, basically created her own reality because she had to.
Because she had to. And we still get to see her vulnerable emotionally, which I also appreciate, because she is a strong character who's figured her stuff out and misses Shelley and wants to hold on to Shelley's engagement ring and is sad that she never got to say goodbye to Eric, because she never did get to say goodbye to Eric or Shelley, for that matter. You know, and we get both. It's fantastic.
I know. It's so sweet when she's just like, I never got to say goodbye. And he was like, I'm sorry about that.
Yep, I'm sorry. And you're just going to have to forgive me for that one.
Just going to have to forgive me for that one. I mean, so like, the character of Eric Draven, I want to sort of touch on it. And of course, Brendan Lee is like, we were talking before the recording that like, it is such a tragedy to lose someone. Like, he was 28 and things have happened because of that loss, because it was literally a series of unfortunate events that led to his death. And I'm not going to go too far into it because there's the internet. People can look up exactly what happened. But essentially, it was the fault of the stunt coordinators trying to make sure they had the right blanks in the gun versus actually cleaning the gun between takes. And they were running themselves a little too thin, and they didn't do the safeties that they needed to. And unfortunately, he was shot point blank in the chest when it was even supposed to be angled a little bit away from him. But they were like, you know what? Because of the angle of the camera, we're shooting blanks anyway. Just straight at him. And for all intents and purposes, it should have been a blank, and it wasn't. Not only the tragedy of losing Brendan Lee in the role helped to obviously make the character of Eric Draven that much more, not sympathetic. I mean, real is like the biggest word.
No, I'm with you.
Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense, because in a terrible way, it aligns with the vibe of this movie. It's like the movie already had the mythos of the character, and now you've added the mythos of this very real, awful tragedy, and the two just got wrapped up in each other.
That's exactly what it was. The majority of the film was shot, but when Brendan Lee died, there were definitely still, it wasn't just a few scenes that needed to be reshot. Like, they definitely needed, like, I think that montage that you love so much, where like he's in the apartment and he's realizing what happened to them, and like that whole thing, I think that was actually a stunt double, and that's why you can't really see his face.
Like when he's taking the makeup out and he's going to put the makeup on, I could for sure see that.
Right. And like, you kind of get this POV shot where like you are him, you know, going through the apartment and like picking things up. I think that's the stunt double. Now, they haven't really released which scenes are which, but that just makes sense to me. They've talked about some, but they haven't talked about all of them. I know they had like a week or a week and a half left to shoot with Brendan.
Okay.
that they lost.
So they had completed a significant portion of the movie. I mean, clearly because the main plot points of the movie are still in place, and we still get a beginning, a middle, and an end, including the deaths of 4 different people.
Yes. Eric Draven very handily takes out everyone he's supposed to take out.
Yes, he does.
There is another villain who was supposed to be in the film, and I'm so sorry, listeners. I'm sure the internet will not fail you if you search for this, but for the life of me, I couldn't find the name of this villain while I was searching for the podcast. But there was a villain that someone was supposed to play, and it was supposed to be kind of a setup for like a sequel. And I believe they shot a couple of I forget what they're called. It's basically like a costume test and like a makeup test.
Yeah.
Before you start filming, so that the director like knows what they want and they tweak anything. So they had shot a bunch of those. And Alex Proyas, the director, wasn't entirely sure he wanted to finish the film because he was like, you know, this was such a big production and Brendan Lee was such a big part of it. Like some of me doesn't feel, you know, like maybe we should just leave it undone, like leave it unfinished.
Yeah.
And eventually, I forget if it was also Brendan's like the Lee family or Brendan's fiance's family, who was just like, I think you're wrong. I think Brendan would want you to finish this film.
And this is like part of his legacy. Yeah. And
exactly.
it shouldn't go unviewed or unseen.
Exactly. He was like his father, like Bruce Lee. He was very much a visual actor, and it would have been a disservice, I think, to keep this from the public. Because it is his best work, which is, I mean, you know, it doesn't say very much also because he was like dipping his toe into film by that point. He was 28. He was a baby.
He didn't have time to fully develop his career, and who knows where his career could have taken him. Yeah.
Exactly. It also spawned so many conspiracy theorists, but that's beside the point. We're not going to get into that. That's a different podcast.
You know what, listeners, if you want to hear about all that, that's what the internet is for. You may Google it.
You have the Google in your pocket.
Now, speaking of building up to a sequel, I'm glad you pointed that out because that reminded me that I actually thought, just as I was watching the movie, that it was going to end about 15 minutes before it actually did. Because that scene where, well, first of all, that scene at the end where the big bad, whose actual character name I still don't know, so I'm just going to keep...
Top dollar.
I was not that far off. I was not that far off.
And so just to clarify, his character is a little bit like thinner in the movie. I don't know reasons. I don't know why that is. But like he is supposed to be this like huge capitalist who basically makes money off of all these little things that go wrong throughout the city, right? Like somebody strong arms somebody else and he gets $1,000 for the job that they just did. Or he gets a cut of Mr. Gideon's profits, you know, things like that.
Yeah, it's really unclear precisely his role in this. If I could give a second's complaint about this movie, it would be that the villain wasn't very fleshed out. And listeners of this show will know that Joy and I love a good, complicated villain, and this was not a good, complicated villain. This was... I mean, I don't even know if I'd call him a capitalist. He kind of seemed like an anarchist because he had a great way of making money. He was making tons of money. He was very successful. And then his whole speech at the end of the movie is, but what if we just blew it all up? What if we just blew it all up for drama? For the sake of, you know?
when you're a capitalist, but also a pyromaniac.
And also prone to boredom, I suppose. I'm not really sure. It doesn't matter. Anyway, that last scene where he's standing at the head of the table and then the crow shows up and then there's that whole big shootout, that very well could have been the big showdown, quotes, in the movie. And then the scene where Top Dollar, Micah, I think is how you would pronounce her name. They never really say it in the film. I just saw it written on IMDb. So yes, Micah. So Top Dollar, Micah, and his other hench person with the glasses and the hat. are driving off in the car, and they come up with that little, ooh, if we kill the crow, then we'll...
Actually.
Yes, if we kill the crow, then we'll be able to sever the connection between the world of the living and the world of the dead, and then he'll die. I actually thought the movie was going to end there.
That would be a logical place.
It seems like a fine enough conclusion. That said, I'm very happy that it didn't, because I very much enjoyed seeing the reversal of the crow's powers. Not only can the crow use his telepathic abilities to absorb memories from other people, he can also push those memories into other people's heads. So we do get that great moment of the big bad experiencing the 30 hours of trauma that Shelley went through all in one moment.
Which was pretty great.
Precisely the payoff that I wanted this character to experience.
That's 100% what that was. I think the villain, I think if anything, this movie has a lot of one-note villains. You know, Fun Boy is, for all intents and purposes, just like a drugged out dude.
He's a fun boy.
The only one that's actually kind of interesting was Tintin, but he was basically just a murderous rapist.
And the first to die. Terribly.
And the first to die. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, he was going to die anyway. I just don't know why he had to be first.
Right. Because it was the 90s. That's why.
Because it was the 90s, I know. He is the one that's like roaming the streets, right? Obviously looking for someone else to murder, I guess. I don't know.
And or rape.
Just
who knows?
Weirdly one note. Weirdly one note.
Joy was telling me before we started that the actual Crow comic series was pretty limited, just a few installments, but then the Crow did show up in other superhero stories or other what have yous, and I could 100% see that because he's so interesting.
He's so interesting. And he, like, I love a hero that doesn't exactly know where they fall on the moral spectrum, right?
I mean,
like
chaotic,
you know, well, okay, look.
Chaotic good, I would say, is where this one falls. Chaotic neutral.
Good. I mean,
perhaps?
he has a very strong sense of justice. Very strong sense of justice.
He will go outside the law to
Chaotic
achieve
lawful.
that justice. Chaotic lawful? Are you allowed to be that?
I don't know. I don't actually know. I don't think so. I'm pretty sure that doesn't exist. Lawful chaotic also doesn't exist. No, like...
He's an anti-hero is what we're attempting to say. He's an anti-hero.
Let us know who you think. Let us know who you think he is. You know, in true superhero fashion, he has this thing within him where he's not even entirely sure if he's human. And he's not. For all intents and purposes, he is essentially a spirit, or maybe even some might say a demon, or something that just like came back to life into a body of someone who had been alive with their memories. That is not who he is anymore. Like, he's not actually Eric Draven, and he doesn't pretend to be. By the way, that scene that you were talking about where he's like sort of crawling out of the grave and like walking down this alleyway and not really sure, like the lights are too bright almost, you know, and like the rain is too harsh, and like he's not wearing any shoes, and like he doesn't know where he is, and the crow's trying to help him, obviously.
Yes.
But they were try so hard. The crow is just like, here are some shoes.
Here's some
Stop
shoes.
It. Suck it up.
Here are the stairs. Here's your apartment.
Suck it up. The crow didn't say that. But I remember watching the director commentary a while back, and they were talking about how they wanted that sequence of events to come off like an actual rebirth. That's definitely how it comes across.
Yeah.
Because, you know, like the miracle of life, as we sometimes call it, is, you know, messy and difficult and hard sometimes. And yeah, it's a miracle for sure.
There's a lot of muck involved.
Yes. There's muck and pain and sometimes harshness, and you know what I mean? Like it's a complicated thing. He was trying to evoke that. He was trying to evoke, like, this is a person basically being born out of this
Yes.
And I think he accomplished it.
Yeah. Now that I know that's what he was
across
going
that
for, 100%. Absolutely. We can't not talk about Sergeant Albrecht. There wasn't a great way for me to transition into the sergeant,
I know.
so there we go. That was it.
I know, Ernie Hudson.
Ernie Hudson.
Doing the best thing I've seen him in ever. I don't know. You know, like, I really enjoy him in Ghostbusters. Personally, I like him in this way more. Like, I just really enjoy... I enjoy him so much. I enjoy that, like, he used to be a detective and he still has those detective skills, but he's been knocked down a peg.
Yes, for asking too many questions and sticking his nose in the wrong people's business. So I guess actually Top Dollar does have some power in the city.
Like, but also, he's knocked down before we even meet him. He's already, I mean, I say beat cop. I don't mean beat cop. Like, he's already a sergeant by the time we meet him while he's investigating Shelley and Eric's death. Because the detective, who, by the way, is like, why would you remove her from the crime scene? And I'm like, she's literally bleeding out onto the floor.
Yeah, that's why. And did he say that actually there was a first sweep through the crime scene and they somehow missed her body? And then he approached the crime scene and found her? Why do I feel like I heard that? Now you're going to have to go back and watch it. I feel like I heard this throwaway line where he was like, and you missed her. I was like, what? Was she under the covers? Did they not look?
I mean, I do think he likes to rub it in his face whenever he does something that the detective misses. Mm-hmm. Because, like, that's his literal last line of the movie is he's like, and you missed it. You know? Or it's like, I'm doing my job way better than you ever did yours, and I'm just a sergeant. Mm-hmm. Oh man, I love him so much. I also love that he, like, I mean, we don't really get to see it, but he sort of has this, like, rich inner life of, like, he used to be married, and now he's kind of married to his job, and, like, I love that he's so warm.
Oh,
and so,
yes. Do we use the word real again? We can use the real.
I mean, I know.
But
so
yes, that is what he is. He's a warm, real, full person. He's so married to his job, in fact, that when he's relaxing in his apartment and he's taken off most of the uniform, he keeps the hat on. I love that scene between him and the Crow where we actually get to see them talking and the Crow, like, goes to the fridge and gets him a beer, pops it for him, and is like, you're going to need this. Now tell me about this age-old case file that you were involved in.
I know.
They had a couple of really good scenes together, the two of them.
I hadn't realized it yet that my brand was like noir detective story with a touch of supernatural. But like this was the first one. The one that solidified it was Dark City, which maybe we'll watch for the podcast at some point. But like
we've watched that on a different personal movie night.
Yes. I've showed that to Danielle before.
So this is...
Although, I don't know, maybe she won't enjoy it as much if I have her look at it a little more critically. We'll see.
Or I'll like it even more because perhaps I'll see something beyond the visuals, which I was entirely distracted by the first time through the movie.
That happens. That'll happen.
That'll be one where I'll watch it a second time for the plot. Now that I've gotten over all of the...
Now that you've seen it once. No, yes, so Albrecht. Sorry, continue.
I wish him well on his journey towards becoming a non-smoker. I'm happy he survived the movie even though he was shot in the gut.
I know. That did not look good.
Whew! If he had died, I would have been really upset. He and Sarah have this wonderful relationship.
I know. I think it's like when you have movies like this and you have characters in sort of this comic booky world, like you need the real characters to sort of keep it all grounded. And that's what he and Sarah do.
He and Sarah were absolutely the real characters in this film. Mm-hmm.
I mean, against the backdrop of a man in a clown mask walking around and killing people.
Gothic clown makeup.
I know.
Quotes on the goth. 90s goth clown makeup. There we go.
90s goth clown makeup. There were so many crows who went as Halloween that year, by the way. Gotta tell you.
Of course there were. What a great costume.
Right? I mean, you basically just dress all in black and put on this clown makeup and maybe you grease up your hair a little bit. It was the simplest thing and it was so easy.
Maybe you go a step extra. You go to the store and buy one of those fake crow raven things that could sit on your shoulder.
Yes. Maybe you splurge and get a really nice leather duster, you know, and you get the nice boots.
And then, you get to reuse it when you dress as someone from The Matrix later. It's a win-win.
It's a win-win. Okay, so we didn't talk about this at all, but I do have to tell you the soundtrack of this movie is one of the best, happiest, times of my music life. Like, I listen to this soundtrack on repeat.
I meant to say that earlier when I was talking about the montage, because part of what makes a montage really great is the soundtrack. Yeah, it was very effective.
It was so effective. The soundtrack for this movie lives rent-free in my brain. Like, whenever I hear one of the songs from it in something else, I'm instantly like, oh, that's right, that was in The Crow. Mm-hmm. And, I know all the words.
Okay. So
that can be my one more thing. The music. The music is great.
My one more thing will be very on brand. And it is that this movie had a cat and the cat survived. I do have questions about how the cat survived, because when the cat first appeared in the apartment and the crow picks up the cat and he goes, oh, Gabriel. I was like, oh, Gabriel. And, my brain just figured Sarah was probably feeding the cat. And that's how Gabriel has lived in the apartment this entire time. But then Sarah is surprised when she happens upon Gabriel 3/4 into the movie. So it wasn't Sarah who was feeding him. It's unclear, but I'm still happy that he survived.
Okay, so story time, real quick. My parents, I think it was their cat specifically. When they were living in California, they would feed a cat that would come to their balcony, and they would leave out some food and the cat would eat. And then a couple of days later, the cat would come back and eat some more. And it was not a super fat cat, little on the heavy side. But eventually, they kind of stopped seeing the cat. And then they were like, what happened to the cat? And they realized the cat would just go from apartment to apartment.
Oh, yes.
Eating. And everyone had a different name for the cat. And
everyone thought the cat was theirs, and the cat was
basically the building's cat.
That's so cute. You know what? I love that. I will accept it. That is the headcanon for how Gabriel survived.
Yes, that is an excellent one more thing. I appreciate that you were like, there was a cat.
A cat. And it survived.
Danielle, I think we covered it. I know, The Crow will always have a special place in my heart, for sure.
I'm really happy you showed this to me, actually.
Did it answer some questions about me as a person?
It also, I think it fit in really well with all of the other movies you've showed me. It helps me understand you better as a person. And
I have a brand.
I think you have a brand. I also think it's one of those movies that I wouldn't have stopped and given a second thought to, and I'm happy that we did. Because this is one of those rare movies where if you think a little bit about it, it gets better, not worse.
I would agree with you. This is definitely a movie that the more I watch it, the more I like it, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And it's not, that wasn't true for everybody, but it was true for me.
And me. Okay, what a fantastic way to end this episode. All right, listeners, we would love to hear from you. Please check us out at Binge O'Clock Pod on Twitter and Facebook, where you can answer the question, if you could share a memory with someone telepathically, what memory would you share? You can also email us at bingeoclockpod@gmail.com. And don't forget, we have a Patreon. Find us at patreon.com/BachPod.
That's right. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your loved ones, tell the live lobsters in your life about Binge O'Clock, and we will see you next time. Fringe, not only did you fringe this, Fringe?
Fringe.
Right. That's the other podcast, Joy. Not only did you fridge they're so close. They're just missing a letter. And our one Asian woman. So go team.
Can anyone else hear the pained cat?
That cat, too, did not like the crow. Kept trying to attack the crow.
That cat is just as upset about fringed women and poor female representation as everyone on this call.
that cat is a feminist. You will pry that feminist ideals from her cold, dead claws.
What is happening with it?
I'm just very mad that you're in a closet, Danielle. It was basically the building's cat. I'm not talking about you, darling. It's a very cat-heavy episode without intending to be.
That's okay.